Mike Deeks is my name, and I've been in Western Australia this occasion for the last 17 years, but I've had a number of other periods of my life here in Western Australia. I joined the Navy when I was 15, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and spent 32 years in the Navy. As I say, during that time I came to the West on a number of occasions for postings. My career was largely in submarines, which in the early 90s moved to Western Australia, and I did with it. I ended up as the head of the submarine arm based here in Western Australia, and also as the senior defence officer for the Navy, or for defence in Western Australia. During my career I commanded 3 submarines and also the fleet replenishment ship HMAS Success, and as I say, finished up in a very enjoyable posting here in the West. Fell in love with Western Australia and retired from the Navy and stayed here. And for the last 13 years or so I've pursued a career in defence industry based here in Western Australia. So worked in a number of different companies, from what was at that stage an SME, Nautronics, which we then sold into the L3 empire, and it became L3 Nautronics, then L3 Oceania, and still is going well today. I was there for a couple of years. I also, concurrently with that, did some work for the state government, consulting to them for the purposes of developing the common user facility here at the Australian Marine Complex. So the second stage of development, which involved putting in the floating dock, getting ASC set up here to do the submarine maintenance here, and increasing the wharf capacity at the common user facility. From those 2 roles I moved on into Raytheon, and headed up Raytheon's operations here in Western Australia for about 7 years. That was primarily focused on supporting the submarine arm with the combat system, but we also had a role up at Exmouth at the Naval Communication Station up there, and we pursued a number of other areas, including the square kilometre array and the like. And then most recently I joined Civmec about 3 years ago to start up their new business unit, growing the business in Marine and Defence. Well, Civmec is a relatively young company, formed in 2009 by 2 gentlemen who certainly know their business, Jim Fitzgerald, the Executive Chairman, and Pat Talon, the CEO. Over the years since they formed the company, they've grown it through diversification. So initially starting off in construction in relation to the mining sector, but over the years have diversified into subsea module construction for the oil and gas industry, a lot of pipe spooling, civil infrastructure. We're the proud constructors of the new Perth Stadium, and more recently the pedestrian bridge leading to the stadium. They've also expanded geographically from the footprint initially in Western Australia, now through Broome, Darwin, Gladstone, Newcastle, Sydney, Adelaide, right around the country. So it's been an interesting and very successful ride. As they've diversified, they've always had an eye on the marine and defence industry as an area they wanted to grow into. I joined the company in September 2015 to head up that next stage of diversification into that industry sector. I joined initially as the General Manager Defence for Civmec, and then as part of our strategy that we developed in those early days, we acquired Forgacs, which at that stage was Australia's largest privately owned shipyard. That allowed us to accelerate our move into the defence industry. Forgacs was a well-established brand and a well-regarded shipyard, primarily on the East Coast, Newcastle and Brisbane were their primary locations. But taking on that name with that heritage was a good move for Civmec. And what it meant for me personally was then I became the Managing Director of Forgacs Marine and Defence under the Civmec banner as a wholly owned subsidiary of Civmec. Civmec, as I mentioned, grew quite rapidly, especially in the early days. The revenue tripled in the first 2 years of operation, and then went from around $60 million in year 2 to about $330 million in year 3. I guess the success factors for Civmec are largely it's led by people who are very strategic in their nature. They think about where they can best offer the solutions that the customer needs. The range of services that Civmec offer allow the customer to have a one-stop shop, so they can come to us for everything from earth moving to precast concrete, structural steel, and then peripheral capabilities like scaffolding, refractory, a lot of additional services. So that simplifies it for the customer. It's also all about offering productivity. Civmec's competition is largely offshore in Asia, and to compete in that market you have to be productive. So that's what we strive to do, and we're always looking for productivity gains that we can make. From all of that, I guess what that means in practical terms is that Civmec ensures that its people are very well trained. So we're a registered training organisation in our own right, and we deliver a range of courses and qualifications, over 30 altogether. We ensure that we've got the best equipment. So the executive here is very attentive to the market in terms of what's available in terms of equipment, and what will increase productivity. And then thirdly, there's a strong focus on processes. So in the early days, Civmec tried to use off-the-shelf document and material management systems. They couldn't find one that suited their needs and that was sufficiently adaptable to the changing circumstances of the company. So they bit the bullet and developed their own one, known as CivTrack, which has proved to be an award-winning system that allows us to offer our customers a great deal of confidence that they understand where their particular project is at, whether it's drilling down to the component level or looking at the project as a whole. So all of those things, the people, the training, the equipment and the processes, and that attention to refining productivity and encouraging it at all levels of the business is probably the major reasons that Civmec has got to where it is today. The current workforce of Civmec is around between 2,500 and 3,000, certainly moving towards 3,000 later this year. We've got, as I mentioned before, we've got sites all around Australia, and we've also got a number of teams deployed to project sites in the Pilbara, around the sort of Kalgoorlie mining area, up in the Northern Territory, Tennant Creek, up in North Queensland at the Rio Tinto Amrun project and the like. So that workforce is quite dispersed across the country. Here at Henderson, on any given day, I would estimate there's probably somewhere around 700 people. The makeup of that workforce is primarily blue collar, fabricators, electricians, plumbers, scaffolders, riggers, those types of skill sets. We pride ourselves on the quality of our people, so we do make sure that their qualifications are up to date and current, and also we, as again another way of ensuring productivity, we cross-train people. So when we send a team away to a remote site, if we can have someone who is not only trained in their core skill, which may be fabrication, but can also drive a forklift, operate a crane, act as a rigger, do peripheral capabilities like that, it saves manpower, it enhances them as an employee and as someone who's wanting to gain qualifications, and it's a win-win for everybody. So it's an Australian-based workforce. We don't take a lot of people from overseas unless we're absolutely necessary to do that, and at the moment I'd say that's almost nil as a number of people we have from overseas, and that's typical. We want to grow the business here in Australia for Australia. Civmec is an Australian company. Civmec is listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange. That was a decision that was made by the board back in around 2012, and the purpose of listing on the Singapore Stock Exchange, or the reason for listing on the Singapore Stock Exchange, was largely because there was a lack of appetite in Australia and amongst Australian investors to invest in the manufacturing industry, with the demise of the car industry and other significant manufacturing quarters in Australia, investors were shy about investing in a company like Civmec. Singaporean investors were much more prepared to back us. And our chairman and other members of the board had previous experience of listing in Singapore. But we are an Australian-based company. Our headquarters is here in Henderson. And for information, we are now just in the final stages of listing on the Australian Stock Exchange. We'll dual list both in Singapore and on the Australian Stock Exchange. But no doubt about it, we're an Australian company. We pay Australian taxes, and the Singaporean element of our business is simply to provide the necessary financial backing. You could probably couch it in terms of so as we've moved into the defence industry, we've recognised that this is diversifying the business in a new way, and it requires us to assess our facilities and our capacity to take on work in the marine and defence space. To that end, the company made the decision some time ago to expand our facilities here at Henderson, and also the acquisition of the Forgacs facility in Newcastle was part of this intent to back ourselves and to grow a capacity so that we stayed ahead of the curve of our ability to meet new requirements. So here at Henderson, it's very exciting. We've acquired the block of land to the south of our existing facilities, and currently under construction are two new buildings. One is a surface treatment facility, or paint and blast shed. It's quite sizable in its own right, 80 metres long by 30 metres wide and 30 metres high, so we can fit a whole Luerssen OPV into that shed. And we can subdivide it into two different compartments if needed to paint and blast at different stages, different modules, for example. But the really exciting part of that project is the large new fabrication hall. It'll be the largest shipbuilding facility in Australia. In rough dimensional terms, the playing area of the MCG can fit inside the building, and the roof of Etihad Stadium comes about halfway up the height of the building. So it'll be a sizable symbol on the horizon at Henderson of the coming of age of the West Australian shipbuilding industry. Inside the building, the main hall is divided into three separate bays. The large bay in the centre is 42 metres wide and 60 metres underneath the hook of the cranes. That means that we can fit into that central bay two frigates or destroyers, either current frigates or destroyers or any of the future frigates that might be down selected for construction by Australia. That'll be a great asset for the Navy to have, the fact that they can put in complete ships undercover, out of the weather. It'll provide them with certainty of schedule of maintenance, ideal conditions for doing that maintenance. Between the central bay and the outer two bays are two multi-storey dividers that run the full length of the workshop. And again, this is a move towards maximising productivity. So the typical work day for a worker in that workshop will be that they'll park in the multi-storey car park out of the front of the building. They'll walk across bridges through security into the building. They'll then find escalators which will take them up or down to the work level that they need to be on. And then they'll walk out onto the dividers between the bays and directly onto the ship or the module that they're working on. Within those dividers, they will find everything they need for their day's work. So whether that's lunch rooms or ablution blocks, project offices, ready-use storerooms and the like on each of the levels of the dividers. On the ground floor of each of the dividers and on the ground floor across the front of the building, underneath two office floors, there are workshops, so very large workshops. The one across the front will be a pipe workshop, and then the workshops underneath the dividers will be used for electrical, HVAC, etc. So what we're trying to achieve there is a very highly productive workplace. It's one that's also well set up for subcontractors. One of Civmec's philosophies throughout its life has been that we don't try and do everything. We recognise that there are subcontractors that bring skills and capabilities that we don't have, or they can do it better than we can. And so this building is being set up for that as well. So there will be office space, there'll be storerooms, and there'll be workshops purpose-built for subcontractors to come on site and work on the ships or the modules that we're doing here alongside the Civmec workers. That building will be complete by late next year, November 2019, which is in ample time for the first of the OPVs to be built here in Western Australia, which will start in early 2020. The facilities we have here in the West are designed to be an integrated shipbuilding facility, so our existing workshop and existing paint and blast facilities, as well as the new one and the new workshop, will be all involved in production of the OPVs. So they will start life in the old existing workshop and then transition into the new workshop for block consolidation and ship construction.